Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commander Deck Tech. Today we'll be taking a look at my Nebuchadnezzar How to Play Go Fish in Commander deck. Because I've seen people talk about, they figured out how to play chess in Magic the Gathering, and they've figured out how to play Uno in Magic the Gathering. And so I was trying to come up with my own version of playing other games in Magic the Gathering, and Nebuchadnezzar was a discard commander that I played a long time ago. And so I was like, I can figure out how to play Go Fish in Commander. So this deck was designed to be a bracket 1 deck because it's a very, shall we say, inconsistent discard focused deck. And so I would say it would be an upper bracket level 1 rather than a lower, mostly because discard decks in general are a little bit, I don't know how you would say it, a little bit saltier than your average deck because people like playing with their cards, and discard decks aim to prevent that from happening. And so let's get right into this. So Nebuchadnezzar is an old Legends commander. So Nebuchadnezzar says, pay X and tap it and name a card. Target opponent reveals that many cards from their hand, and if the named card is in their hand, they discard it. And you can only use that ability during your own turn. Doesn't say sorcery speed, so you can do it at any point during your turn, but it has to be in your own turn. So this is the start of the Go Fish aspect of it. Because this is one of those, you could either get lucky or you could know what they have and aim for that. So for example, let's say you know for a fact your opponent has call it a basic island. We'll just call it a basic island for the sake of this. And they have 7 cards in hand. You could either pay up to 7 and name basic island, and then because they have that, they would discard it. Or you could roll the dice. You could even just pay 1 mana into it, and they reveal 1 card at random from their hand, and if that happens to be the basic island, they discard it. So this deck revolves around learning what kind of information is in your hand and then making them discard focused cards rather than either at random or they get to decide. So you do have a little more control over what they discard, provided you have the information necessary to force them to discard that one. So that's the first part of the Go Fish. They'd be like, do you have any soul rings? And that's the opponent's side. Now, that wouldn't be fun if your opponents were the only ones to play or if you were the only one playing Go Fish. So let's go over here to how we let your opponents play Go Fish as well. And that revolves around this card here, Liar's Pendulum. 1 mana artifact, pay 2 mana and tap it and name a card. Target opponent guesses whether a card with that name is in your hand, and then you may reveal your hand, and if you do and your opponent guessed wrong, you draw a card. So that's your opponent going, do you have any soul rings? And then either yes or no, and if you don't, you draw a card. Now, if they guess correctly, you don't discard that card, but you don't get to draw a card. So that's the primary way of playing Go Fish in Commander. Now let's move along to how you gain the necessary information that you would need to maximize Nebuchadnezzar's ability. So the first order of figuring that out, let's move down to the hand info section. It's a custom category I made. this is how we get to glean bits of information from your opponent's hand. Now there's 27 sources of this in this deck. And basically, like 99% of the discard cards in this deck force your opponent to reveal either a certain amount of cards in their hand or just their hand in general. So stuff like Duress, for example. They reveal their hand and you pick a non-creature, non-land card from it and they discard it. The key point of this is the reveal their hand. So for example, the first one, Bandit's Talent, doesn't force them to reveal their hand, but they do discard 2 cards unless they discard a non-land. And then when you level it up, at their upkeep, if they have 1 or fewer cards in their hand, they lose 2 life. And the final one is at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card for each opponent who has 1 or fewer cards in hand. So this is a drain effect like Shrieking Affliction, but it's also a card draw engine for you as well. So that's super useful in a deck like this. My God, what is going on with my screen? All right, so then we got Blackmail, which is a 1-mana sorcery that says target player reveals 3 cards from their hand and you choose one of them and they discard that. Now this is a cheap way of getting info from your opponent's hand, and at that point it doesn't matter what type of cards they reveal, you just get to pick one of them. So then if, for example, now you know those 2 cards, and if they don't either play those cards or get rid of them, then you can feed into Nebuchadnezzar to pick one of those. So that's generally how this deck functions. Then we got Brain Fry, 2-mana sorcery, name a non-land card, target player reveals their hand, they discard a card with that name, and if they can't, you draw a card. So this could also just be a straight up draw spell. So let's say you just wanted to draw a card off this, and they're playing mono blue, and you could name a lightning bolt, and then they reveal their hand. So now you glean info off that, and obviously they can't discard a lightning bolt if they're playing mono blue, so you would draw a card off that. But this is another kind of like a cheaper option of Nebuchadnezzar's ability, because you name a card specifically, and then if you pick right, they got it, or they discard it. Now, Clairvoyance is just a straight up peek at their hand effect. 1 blue mana instant, look at target player's hand, and then you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So you'll notice as I go through the deck, the average mana value of each of the cards in this deck is extremely low. The reason for this is we want cheap sources of card info, because if we want to guarantee we hit stuff off of Nebuchadnezzar, we do have to pump a lot of mana into his ability. So the average CMC of this deck, I believe, down below is 2.01, which is the lowest converted mana cost of any deck that I have. Now we get Despise, 1-mana sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a creature or planeswalker card from it. They discard that. Most of these are very straightforward, so I'm just going to go through them pretty quick. Distress, 2 black mana sorcery. They reveal their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. They discard it. Okay, so here we go with Dragon Eye Savants. 1 blue and a colorless. A 0/6 human wizard with morph. Reveal a blue card from your hand. And when Dragon's Eye Savant is turned face up, look at target opponent's hand. So this is another surprise. I get to peek at your hand effect. But after that, it's also a big, beefy blocker. So that's really useful too, because pretty much all of our creatures are value creatures. So you kind of want something to stick around because the other creatures are pretty fragile, shall we say. Duress, like stated before, 1 black mana sorcery. They reveal their hand. You choose a non-land or a non-creature non-land card from it, and they discard it. Here we got Gitaxian Probe, probably the most famous of all the all the peek at your opponent's hands cards. 1 blue Phyrexian mana, which means you can just straight up cast it for free if you pay 2 life. Sorcery, look at target player's hand, then draw a card. Glasses of Urza. Now this is probably the most important of all the hand peeks because it's repeatable. 1 mana artifact, tap it to look at target player's hand. The fact that this is an artifact for 1 mana is extremely important because we run a Urza's Saga down here. Urza's Saga is an enchantment land that's also a saga. Its first saga chapter is tap it to add a colorless. Its second is tap 2 and it to create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token that gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. But the important part is the third chapter. Search your library for an artifact card with mana cost exactly 0 or 1. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. The reason we run this is this fetches 2 of the most important cards from the deck. So both the Liar's Pendulum, which allows your opponents to play Go Fish, and the Urza's Glasses. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. There it is. Both of those are an artifact with converted mana cost 1, so you can fetch either of them off the Urza's Saga. So let's say you have the Glasses of Urza, but you need the Liar's Pendulum, you can get that. Let's say you have the Liar's Pendulum, but you need the Glasses of Urza, you can fetch that. But the Glasses of Urza is probably the more useful of the two, just for Nebuchadnezzar's ability alone. But that gives us way better options to pick than just straight up Soul Ring, which is what people usually get off that. Then we got Ingenious Thief. 2 mana, 1/1 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, look at target opponent's hand. We run a couple of these kind of when they enter, they reveal their hand creatures. Then we got Lay Bare the Heart. We got 2 mana sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-legendary non-land card from it. They discard that card. Then we got Merfolk's Spy. 1/1 Island Walk for 2 mana. Or I think it's just 1 mana. Yeah, 1 blue mana. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player reveals a card at random from their hand. So this one you don't really get to see what you want, but it does give you a thing you can name off Nebuchadnezzar. Myers Toll. Target player reveals a number of cards from their hand equal to the number of swaps you control. You choose one of them and they discard it. Then we got Peak. 1 blue mana instant. Look at target player's hand, then draw a card. Now, Peak is one of the most important cards in the deck because it's an instant. which means we can put that under the Isochron Scepter that we run up here, which, if you don't have the Glasses of Urza, will give you another source of repeatable peek at your opponent's hand. And unlike the Glasses of Urza, this will give you access to a card draw every turn. Back down here, we have Pilfer. One black and a colorless sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it and they discard it. Ragman. Now this is an old and I would say pretty bad creature, but in this deck it's actually super useful. 2 black and 2 colorless, 2/1 minion. Pay 3 black and tap it. Target opponent reveals their hand and discards a creature card from it at random, and you can only play it during your turn. This is the Shrieking Affliction I mentioned earlier. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if they have 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 3 life. Pair that with Bandit's Talent, Bandit's Talent, and that's a 5 life loss if they have 1 or less. Now, one of the cards that I usually run in a discard-focused deck is Quest for the Nilestone, which is at their upkeep, if they have 0 cards in their hand, they lose 5 life. But in Commander, or in this one, I focus on 1 card at a time, rather than having them discard cards en masse. So the likelihood of them having 0 cards in their hand at their upkeep is very slim, so I left that one out this time. But this one, if they have 1 or less, they lose the life, which is a lot likelier to trigger. Still probably not like super high, but it's still a better chance of it happening than Quest for the Nilestone. Then we got Sorcerer's Sight. This is the sorcery version of Peek, because the Portal 3 Kingdoms sets had alternate versions of cards that already exist, but usually weakened a bit. Now, Spy Network's an interesting one. This is another thing you can put under the Isochron Scepter, and it gives you a whole lot of stuff for that 1 mana. Not only do you look at target player's hand, you also look at the top card of their deck and any face-down creatures they control, and then you get to look at the top 4 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. So this gives you so much value off of 1 mana. Because if they play all the cards in their hand, you still at least know what their top deck is. The face-down creatures aspect is unlikely to happen all that frequently, considering people playing morph-style decks is not exactly the most common thing in Commander, but this is arguably, if you just want information, this is probably the best thing to put under your Isochron Scepter. And we got Talus Explorer. This is basically the exact same thing as the I don't know where it went. Oh, the Ingenious Thief. This is quite literally the exact same thing, honestly. But because it's a different name, you get to run both of them. 1/1 flyer enters the battle, or when you play it, look at target opponent's hand. And Telepathic Spies is a 2/2 version of that, but it just doesn't have flying. Then we got Thought Erasure, blue-black sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You pick a non-land card from it and they discard it, and then you surveil 1. which means you look at the top card of your deck and you can choose to put it in your graveyard if you wish. Bot Cutter Agent is a fun one. Blue, black 1/1, and you can pay blue black and tap it. Target player loses 1 life and reveals their hand. Then we got Thoughtseize, probably the most famous of all the 1-mana discard spells. 1 black mana sorcery, target player reveals their hand, you pick a non-land card from it, they discard it, and then you lose 2 life. Then we got Urza's Bauble, a 0-mana artifact that you can tap and sacrifice it to look at a card at random from target player's hand, and then you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Again, just more individual cards that get revealed to utilize Nebuchadnezzar's ability. And the nice thing is, this doesn't cost any mana to do it. Then we got Woo Scout, 2 mana 1/1 with Horsemanship. And when it comes into play, look at your opponent's hand. And since pretty much nobody runs Horsemanship, this means you basically get a free 1 damage in on any player you want, which is kind of nice after it's enters and look at an opponent's hand is used up. So those are the main peek at your opponent's hand cards. So let's move on to the next category of important stuff, the Megrim effects. This is the way you will be dealing damage to your opponents, and this is the way you will be winning the game. So first off, we have Bloodchief Ascension, 1 black mana enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. Now note, this does not require it to be dealt from you. This is if they lose 2 life during a turn for any reason, you put a quest counter on it. And whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have them lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. This card here is the reason I don't run a Leyline of the Void in the deck. Because in that case, the cards would never actually enter the yard, so you wouldn't get this ability. Now, if you wanted to make this a more competitive deck, this goes infinite with Mind Crank, which is a, I believe, 2 mana artifact that says whenever an opponent loses life, they mill that many cards. So they would take the 2 life, they would mill 2. That's 2 cards being put into an opponent's graveyard, so they would take 4 damage off the Bloodchief. That's 4 damage, they mill 4, and wash, rinse, repeat until they mill their entire deck. But I don't run that in here because that's a 2-card infinite combo, and that would put it in, I believe, bracket 4 instead of bracket 1. The newest card on the list here is Entropic Battlecruiser. It is a spacecraft from Edge of Eternities that has Station, which means you can tap a creature you control at sorcery speed and put a number of charge counters on it equal to its that creature's power. And as long as it has 1 or more charge counters on it, whenever an opponent discards a card, they lose 3 life. So this is an easy way of getting a Megrim effect that actually does 3 damage, or this one's loss of life, so it's more of a Liliana's Caress. But then it's, if it has 8 or more charge counters on it mode, is you get a 3/10 with flying and death touch, and whenever this spacecraft attacks, each opponent discards a card, then loses 3 life. So that also stacks with the previous one. So they would lose 6 life off of that. Down here we got the Liliana's Caress. 2 mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a card, they lose 2 life. And Megrim, the one that started it all. Whenever an opponent discards a card, Megrim deals 2 damage to that player. Now, important to note, this is damage, whereas Liliana's Caress is life loss. So if your opponent has a card that prevents all damage to them, this will do nothing. Then we got Raider's Wake, a 4 mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a card, they lose 2 life. And it has Raid, which is at the beginning of your end step, if you attacked with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. Now this combined with the Horsemanship creature basically gives you a free target opponent discards a card each turn, which is kind of nice. Isochron's Scepter. This is the one I was talking about earlier. When it enters the battlefield, you may remove an instant card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand from the game. And you may pay 2 mana and tap Isochron's Scepter to copy that instant and play it without paying its mana cost. Now we'll move on to the general discard effects. We got Cabal Therapy. 1 mana sorcery, name a non-land card. Target player reveals their hand and discards all cards with that name. And it has flashback for sacrifice a creature. Then we got Disrupting Scepter. 3 mana artifact, which you can pay 3 mana and tap it. Target player discards a card. Play this ability only during your turn. And again, this is not at sorcery speed. So you can do it whenever you want. You can respond to someone's triggers. You can do it in the middle of your attack if you want. Scepter of the Fuge, which is basically the exact same thing as Disrupting Scepter, except it costs 2 black mana to cast, and it is a colorless and a black to use its ability rather than 3 mana. So it does require that you use colored pips, but it is cheaper if you don't have to worry about that. Then we got the Raven Man. At the beginning of each end, start off with a colorless and a black creature that is a 2/1, and at the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, you create a 1/1 black bird creature token with flying that has this creature can't block. So this will give you another evasive creature to trigger the Raider's Wake raid. And it has pay a black and 3 colorless and tap it. Each opponent discards a card, but only as a sorcery. The fact that this hits each opponent is really nice if you want to spread the damage a lot faster. Then we got the first of our Tiny Bones. 2 mana, 1/3, Skeleton Rogue. Whenever an opponent discards a card, exile it from their graveyard with a stash counter on it. During your turn, you may play cards you don't own with stash counters on it from exile. And mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. And it has the same ability as Raven Man, where pay a black and 3 colorless, tap it. Each opponent discards a card, but only at sorcery speed. Then we got Turok, Dread Cantor. 2 mana Human Cleric with protection from white. And whenever an opponent discards a card, put a +1/+1 counter on him. But it also has Kicker for 2 black, which means you can pay an additional 2 black when you cast it. And if you do so, when he enters the battlefield, target opponent discards 2 cards at random. So if you pay the 2 black, you get a free Hymn to Turok effect, which is still pretty nice. Because this will give you a card that gets really beefy really quick. So this is another source of a lot more damage than just the individual cards will do, provided he can get through. And the protection from white means he's safe from Swords to Plowshare or Path to Exile. We got Waste Not, one of the most important value engines for any discard deck. It's basically an auto-include in those decks. 2-mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a creature, you create a 2/2 black zombie. Whenever they discard a land, you add 2 black. And whenever they discard a non-creature, non-land card, you draw a card. You can never go wrong with a Waste Not in any discard deck. So if any of you are planning to make discard decks, keep this card on hand at all times. There's a reason it's $11.99. It used to be a bulk rare, but now it's worth money. And Word of Waste is probably my favorite discard card of all time. 3-mana enchantment. You can pay 1 mana, and the next time you would draw a card this turn, instead of doing so, each opponent discards a card. Now, the reason this is my favorite is this actually prevents you from decking out if your opponent basically mills out your entire deck, because this is a replacement effect, which means you don't draw the final card from the deck, because even though there's no cards in the deck, you're still drawing from an empty deck. So you can replace that with each of your opponent loses an X amount of life equal to the amount of Megrim effects you have. And so
stop it. Get some help.
Now we'll go more to the generalized draw effects. Another auto-include in any discard deck. Geth's Grimoire, 4-mana artifact. Whenever an opponent discards a card from their hand, you may draw a card. Simple and effective. Then we got Siphon Mind, probably another auto-include in any discard deck. 4-mana sorcery. Each other player discards a card, and you draw a card for each card discarded this way. So this will draw you on average 3 cards, depending on the size of your pod, which is really good, especially when they're discarding as well. Now this is probably the saltiest card in the entire deck. Tiny Bones Trinket Thief. 1 black and a colorless skeleton rogue, 1/2. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent discarded a card this turn, you draw a card and lose a life. And now it has the salty effect. Pay 4 colorless and 2 black. Each opponent with no cards in their hand loses 10 life. This will close out a game really fast if they ever get to the point where they don't have cards in hand. At that point, don't even really bother with Nebuchadnezzar's effect or the other ones. Just drain them for 10 as much as possible before they start regaining cards in their hand. We run 2 protection effects because Nebuchadnezzar is really the only important creature in the deck. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Raven Man and Tiny Bones are really, really good too. So the Swiftfoot Boots is useful on more than just Nebuchadnezzar. I shouldn't have said that. But Swiftfoot Boots, 2-mana artifact equipment, has hexproof and haste for equip 1. This will give Nebuchadnezzar the ability to tap the turn it comes out, which is very useful if you already know several cards in your opponent's hand. And we run Ensnaring Bridge as pretty much the only stacks effect in the deck, but we're not, aside from like the evasive creatures, we're not really attacking, so this is a deterrent for creatures that get big and beefy. Creatures with power greater than the number of cards in your hand can't attack, which actually doesn't really affect us all that much now that I think about it, because all our creatures are really tiny. So this will save your life from big stompy decks. Now we'll get into the ramp effects. Arcane Signet, very straightforward, auto-include in any deck. Tap it, a 2-mana artifact, tap it to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. I'm talking too fast, I'm getting tongue-tied. Demir's Signet, 2-mana artifact with Pay 1 mana and tap it to add a blue-black. Ever-Flowing Chalice. This will definitely help with Nebuchadnezzar's ability. 0 mana artifact with multi-kicker 2, which means you can pay 2 generic any number of times when you cast it, and it enters with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked, and you tap to add a colorless for each charge counter on it. So, if for some ungodly reason you end up at 14 mana before you cast this, this will allow you to pay for Nebuchadnezzar's ability in its entirety. The likelihood that you're going to get to 14 mana in a deck like this where you're not running like land tutors really is unlikely, but it's still there in case it happens. Now, Hearthstone is similar to Training Grounds, and it gets kind of funky with X cost abilities. So activated abilities of creatures, not just yours, this affects your opponents as well, but it reduces the amount of mana that costs to activate it by 1 mana, but it can't reduce the cost to 0. Now, it doesn't explain it well, but how this works with X costs is it effectively pays for one of that. So if your opponent had 1 card in hand and you had Hearthstone out, you could pay 0 into Nebuchadnezzar because the Hearthstone reduces it by 1, and it would act as if you paid the 1. Then we got Soul Ring. That really needs no introduction. 1 mana taps for 2 colorless. Then we got Sword of Feast and Famine. 3 mana equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from black and green. And whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, they discard a card and you untap all lands you control.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
We got Talisman of Dominance. 2 mana rock. Tap to add a colorless, or tap it to add a blue or black, but it deals 1 damage to you if you do that. So this is like Arcane Signet, where it's the cheapest colored mana rock you can run. Then we got Thought Vessel, 2 mana artifact that taps for a colorless, and you have no maximum hand size. Simple, but no maximum hand size is always good, especially in a deck like this where a lot of times per card they discard, you draw a card. So the likelihood that you'll have more cards than not is actually a lot more consistent. You got Thran Dynamo, 4 mana artifact that taps for 3 colorless. So this will make activating Nebuchadnezzar's ability a lot easier to handle in larger hand quantities. Then we got Training Grounds, the more powerful version of Hearthstone. Not only is it cheaper to cast, costs 1 blue, it reduces the abilities of creatures' abilities by 2 colorless instead of 1, and this only affects you rather than all opponents. And then we got Victory Chimes. This is one of the mana rocks that I really, really like. I will be making an update to this deck once the Avatar: The Last Airbender set comes out, because Bender's Water Skin is basically the same version of Victory Chimes, but instead of a colorless that it taps for a mana of any color. But the important part about Victory Chimes is this mana rock untaps during each other player's untap step. So this will give you access to 1 colorless mana worth of mana on everyone else's turn, which means if you have something like the Isochron Scepter, if you have the Bender's Water Skin and the Victory Chimes rather, this means you will get mana to use Isochron Scepter ability on any turn, even if you're all tapped down, which is really useful. And that's it for the main cards. So let's move on to the last aspect of it, which is the lands. So these are not quite as interesting for the deck. It's just your generic blue-black deck stuff. We got Cabal Coffers, tap 2 mana and it to add a black for each swamp you control. And like everybody knows, this combos with Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, which makes each land a swamp in addition to its other types, which basically means Cabal Coffers taps for the amount of lands you control. Now, given this is designed to be a bracket 1 deck, I don't run any of the shock lands because those are a little more on the competitive side than this deck wants to be. But if you wanted to make this deck more competitive, you could absolutely run shock lands and stuff like that in there. So we got Clearwater Pathway. It is a modal double face card, which means when you play it, you can pick which side you want. The first side taps for blue, the back side taps for black. So this will give you access to whichever one you need at the time. And the nice thing about this compared to the lands that tap for one or the other is it enters untapped. Then we got Creeping Tar Pit. This will also combo with the Raider's Wake. Comes in tapped, taps for blue or black, or you can pay 1 mana or 1 generic, a blue and a black. It becomes a 3/2 blue and black elemental creature until end of turn that can't be blocked. So this is another way of getting in that attack damage for Raider's Wake. Then we got Drowned Catacomb. Enters tapped unless you control an island or a swamp, and taps for either blue or black. Then we got Gloom Lake Verge. God, I almost got tongue-tied on that one. Taps for a blue, or it taps for a black. But you can only tap for a black if you control an island or a swamp. We run 7 islands in the deck. Then we got Moonring Island. This is another source of you get to glean information from the top of your opponent's deck, or your own if you really want to. Generally considered bad, but in a deck like this, this is not actually that bad. Enters tapped, but it is a island subtype, which means if you have things that care about islands or fetch islands specifically, you can actually get this card. But the important part is you can pay a blue rather and tap it to look at the top card of target player's library, but only if you control 2 or more blue permanents. Then we got Morphic Pool. Enters tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, which generally speaking you will. So the likelihood that this will enter untapped is almost guaranteed unless you're playing 1v1. Planner Nexus. It is every non-basic land type and taps for a colorless, or you can filter it for 1 mana to add 1 mana of any color. Now the reason this is in the deck is because of the Tron lands. Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Tower. Because since it counts as all of them, this means that each of these will tap for its extra mana immediately instead of having to get all 3. Then we got Reliquary Tower, my favorite land of all time. Taps for a colorless and you have no maximum hand size. Shipwreck Marsh. The land enters tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, which often you will, unless you play this before turn 3. Taps for a blue or black. Then we got Sunken Hollow. Counts as an island and a swamp. Taps for a blue or black. When the land enters, it enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. I run 7 basic swamps in the deck. Temple of Deceit. It enters tapped, and when the land enters, you scry 1. Taps for a blue or a black. We already talked about Urborth. And then we have Urza's Cave. Taps for a colorless, and you can pay 3 mana and sacrifice it to search for any land in your deck. Doesn't have to be a basic land, and you put that land onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So if you have any of the Tron lands, you can use it to fetch for the Planar Nexus. Or if you have Cabal Coffers, you can search for Urborg. If you have Urborg, you could search for Cabal Coffers. There's tons of value lands that you can get off Urza's Cave. Urza's Cave is another one of those where I feel like if you run any important lands in your deck, this is an auto-include because the value you get off of it is really, really good. Especially since, unlike Expedition Map, it puts the land onto the battlefield. Urza's Mine taps for a colorless, but if you control an Urza's Power Plant and an Urza's Tower, taps for 2 colorless. Urza's Power Plant does the same thing as Urza's Mine. And Urza's Tower taps for 3 if you have the other 2 instead of 2. So if you control all 3, that means you get to tap for 7 mana, which is the entirety of Nebuchadnezzar's ability usually. Then we got a single Elixir of Immortality to reshuffle all your discard stuff into the deck and gain 5 life off of it, which doesn't hurt. And last but not least, I forgot about this section. We will move on to gleaming information from the top card of your opponent's deck. We got Foreshadow, 2 mana instant. Name a card, put the top card from target opponent's deck into their graveyard. That card is the named card, you draw a card. But either way, you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So if you already know what their top card is, you get to basically mill them that card and then draw 2. Worst case scenario, you draw 1. Then we got Lurking Informant. 2 mana Human Road, 1/2. You can pay 2 and tap it to look at the top card of target player's deck, and you can choose to put that card into their graveyard if you so desire. Portent. 1 blue mana sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of their deck, of target player's deck, then put them back in any order, and you can have them shuffle if you like. And you draw a turn at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So you can use this on yourself if you want to see, because let's say you're getting mana flooded or something, and you want to guarantee that the next 3 cards aren't lands. You can use this to check and then shuffle if you don't like what's on top. But either way, you draw a card. Precognition is arguably, I don't know if I would call it the worst card in the deck, but it does cost 5 mana. But during your upkeep, you get to look at the top card of target opponent's deck, and then you can choose to put it on the bottom if you want. So let's say your opponent, I don't know, uses a Vampiric Tutor. They put that card on top of their deck. So if you go after them, you get to be like, hey, you know that thing you just tutored for? I'm going to look at it, see what you got, and then put it on the bottom. Sorry, you just wasted your Vampiric Tutor. So it does have its uses. It's just kind of costly. But the upside is that your opponents are probably not going to waste a removal spell on it. Then we got Predict, which is the exact same thing as Foreshadow. Actually, it's not quite the exact same thing. You choose a card name, then they reveal the top card. They put the top card of their deck into their graveyard. If that is the chosen name, you draw 2 cards. Otherwise, you draw a card. So the thing about this one is, unlike Foreshadow, the card you draw is during when you cast it rather than at the next turn's upkeep. So aside from that, it's the same card, and both of those you can put under the Isochron Scepter as well because they're 2-mana instants. Psychic Surgery, 2-mana enchantment. This one will probably rub your opponents the wrong way too. This one's probably going to eat a removal spell. 2-mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent shuffles their deck, you may look at the top 2 cards of their deck. You can choose to exile one of those cards and then put the rest on the top in any order. This one can get kind of nasty, especially if they're cracking a bunch of fetch lands or tutors. Plus, if they tutor for a vampiric, or they use a vampiric tutor and put the card on top of their deck, because it shuffles after, or no, I guess, actually I'm not sure what the order of that would be, because they shuffled the deck and then put the card on top. I'll have to look that up, because if the shuffle effect happens before the card is put on top, does Psychic Surgery trigger before or after that? Yeah, I'm not sure about that actually. But either way, exiling stuff from your opponent's top deck is always good. So Psychic Surgery is very useful. Then we got Rootwater Mystic. 2-mana, 1/1 Merfolk. You can pay a blue and a colorless to look at the top card of target player's deck. And last but not least, we have Wand of Denial. 2-mana artifact. You can tap and look at the top card of target player's deck. If it's a non-land card, you may pay 2 life. If you do, they put it into their graveyard. So worst case scenario, you know the top card of their deck. Best case scenario, you eat 2 life to force them to get rid of it. So that's the general overview of the deck. Let's move on down to the description I have. All right, now I kind of ran over this before, but let's give a recap. So, you want to play Go Fish Commander style? First, let's talk about the world's worst discard commander, Nebuchadnezzar. He lets you pay any amount of mana into his activated ability, and you name a card, any card, even basic lands. Then an opponent of your choosing reveals that many cards at random from their hand. If they reveal 1 or more of the named cards, more being basic lands, yes, Nebuchadnezzar is one of the few discard spells in the game that allows you to name lands, and they discard those cards. If they don't reveal any of the named card, well, that's Go Fish. But it's no fun just playing Go Fish by yourself. Let's get your opponents in on the action as well. That's where Liar's Pendulum comes in. Liar's Pendulum lets you pay 2 colorless mana and you name a card. Then target opponent guesses whether you have the named card in their hand. If they guess incorrectly, you may reveal your hand and they go fish and you draw a card. The rest of the deck focuses on a more normal discard-focused strategy, except we mainly use low-cost discard spells that make your opponent reveal their hand, giving us valuable information that we can use to more accurately name correct cards with Nebuchadnezzar. And we also run a ton of other cards that let us cheat at our Go Fish game, namely cards that allow us to either peek at our opponent's hands or the top of their deck. However, we explicitly don't run any cards that keep your opponent's hands permanently revealed, like telepathy. That's just poor sportsmanship and defeats the whole point of Go Fish. Focus on obtaining and retaining information about what your opponent is keeping in their hand, and whittle their life total down through targeted discards, and go fish yourself all the way to victory. So yeah, that is how to play Go Fish Commander style with Nebuchadnezzar. The Architect does estimate the bracket as bracket 2, basically entirely because of Urza's Saga, because it is a non-land tutor in the deck. However, in this deck specifically, I don't agree with that assessment, because generally speaking, you're either going to get Liar's Pendulum or Glasses of Urza, which I would not say are powerful enough to warrant the automatic upgrade to bracket 2, because the only other stuff you're going to fetch off of it would be either a soul ring. You wouldn't even fetch the Everflowing Chalice because you wouldn't be able to kick it. So really the only other thing aside from Glasses of Urza and Liar's Pendulum that you would get off the Urza Saga would be Soul Ring. But this deck would rather have the Liar's Pendulum or the Glasses of Urza because you're here to play Go Fish. This will get you into the Go Fish more. But yeah, so that is how to play Go Fish in Commander. If you want to do so, I will leave the link to this deck in my YouTube channel's video of this. I don't know if I can do that in the Twitch video, but if I do, I will also leave it in the Twitch video as well. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you will join me next time as I go through more of my Commander deck tech. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time. Take care.